Hello, welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Misery. 3. Darkness. Then the pain and the haze. Then the awareness that, although the pain was constant, it was sometimes varied by an uneasy compromise in which he was supposed was relief. The first real memory, stopping and being raked back to life by the woman's stinking breath. Next real memory, her fingers pushing something into his mouth at regular intervals. Something like contact capsules, only since there was no water, they only sat in his mouth, and when they sheltered, there was an incredibly bitter taste that was a little like the taste of aspirin. It would have been good to spit the bitter taste out, but he knew better than to do it, because it was bitter taste which brought the high tide and over the pilings. It's Piling's hair. There are two there. Okay, there are two fine now. Just shush. Just shush. And it seemed gone for a while. And these things all came at widely spaced intervals. Then at the pain itself began to recede but to erode. At that Revere Beach must have eroded, he thought, because there was nothing forever, although the child he had been scoffed at such heresy. Outside things began to impinge more rapidly until the objective world, with all its fright of memory, experience, and prejudice, has pretty much reestablished itself. He was Paul Sheldon, who wrote novels of two kinds, good ones and bestsellers. He had been married and divorced twice. He smoked too much, or had before all this, whatever all this was. Something very bad had happened to him, but he was still alive. The dark gray cloud began to dissipate faster and faster. It would be a while yet before his number one fan brought him to the old cackling royal with the grinning gap mouth and the Ducky Daddles voice, but Paul understood long before that he was in a hell of a jam. The prettiest part of his mind saw her before. The present part of his mind saw her before he knew he was seeing her. And surely she must have understood before he was understanding her. Why else did he associate such doubt-obvious images with her? Whenever she came into the room, he thought of the graven images worshipped by superstitious African tribes, the novels of H. Rider Haggard and Stones and Doom. The images of Annie Wilkes as an African idol out of She or King Solomon's mind was both ludicrous and queerly apt. She was a big woman who, other than large but unwelcoming swell of her bosom under the gray cardigan sweater she was always wore, seemed to have no feminine curves at all. There was no defined roundness of hip or buttock or even calf below the endless succession of wool skirts she wore in the house. She retired to her unseen bedroom to put on jeans before doing her outside chores. Her body was big, but not generous. There was a feeling about her of clots and roadblocks rather than welcoming orifices or even open spaces, areas of hiatus. Most of all, she gave him a disturbing sense of solidarity, as if she might not have any blood vessels or even internal organs, as if she might be the only solid Annie Wilkes from side to side to the bottom. He felt more and more convinced that her eyes, which appeared to move, were actually just painted on, and they moved more than the eyes of the portraits which follow you to appear wherever you move in the room where they hang. It seemed to him that if he had the first two fingers of his hand into a V and attempted to poke them up her nostrils, they might go less than an eighth of an inch before encountering a solid, if slightly yielding obstruction. Then evening her gray cardigan and frumpy house skirts and faded outside work jeans were part of that solid, fibrous, unchanneled body. So his feeling that she was like an idol in a perverted novel was not really surprising at all. Like an idol, she only gave one thing, a feeling of uneasy, deepening, steadily toward terror. Like an idol, she took everything else. No, that wasn't quite fair. She did give something else. She gave him pills that brought the tide over the pilings. The pills were the tide. Annie Wilkes was the lunar presence which pulled him into his mouth like a jetsam on a wave. She brought him 2 every 6 hours, first announcing her presence out as a pair of fingers poked into his mouth, and soon enough he learned to suck eagerly as these poking fingers in spite of the bitter taste. Later appeared in her cardigan sweater and one of these half-dozen skirts, usually with a paperback copy of one of his novels tucked under his arm. At night she appeared to him in a pink fuzzy robe, her face shining with some sort of cream. He couldn't name the main ingredient easily enough, even though he had never seen the bottle from which she tipped it. The sheepy smell of the lanolin was strong and proclamatory, snaking him out of the frowsy, dream-thick sleep with the pills nestled in her hand and the poxy moon nestled in the window over one of her shoulders. After a while, after the alarm became too great to be ignored, he was able to find out she was feeding him. It was a painkiller with codeine base called Novril. The reason she had to bring him to the bedpan so infrequently was only because he was on a diet consisting entirely of liquids and gelatins. Earlier, when he was in the cloud, she had fed him intravenously, but also because Novril had a tendency to cause constipation in patients taking it. Another side effect, a rather serious one, was respiratory depression in sensitive patients. Paul was not particularly sensitive, even though he had been a heavy smoker for nearly 18 years, but his breathing had stopped nonetheless on at least one occasion. There might have been others in the haze, but he did not remember. There was a time she gave him mouth-to-mouth. It might have just been one of those things that happened, but he later came to suspect she had nearly killed him with an accidental overdose. She didn't know about what she was doing as she believed she did. There was only one of the things about Annie that scared him. He discovered 3 things simultaneously about 10 days after having emerged from the dark cloud. The first was that Annie Wilkes had a great deal of Novril. She had, in fact, many drugs of all kinds. The second, that he was hooked on Novril. The third was Annie Wilkes was dangerously crazy. And I'm gonna stop it right there. Thanks for listening.